King Solomon, revered as the wisest man to ever walk the earth, was a king blessed with unparalleled wisdom, staggering wealth, and immense power. His reign marked an era of unmatched prosperity for Israel, and his name became synonymous with wisdom and grandeur. However, beneath the glittering surface of his achievements lies a more profound and sobering story. A story of how a man so deeply favored by God could end his life in spiritual ruin, despair, and regret. What truly happened to King Solomon? How did his life, filled with promise and divine favor, take such a tragic turn? Join us as we delve into the untold story of Solomon's final days, exploring the reflections on his glory, downfalls, and the heartbreaking consequences of turning away from God. His journey offers lessons that continue to resonate with us today, serving as a timeless warning against the dangers of pride, temptation, and the allure of worldly desires. As we embark on this exploration of King Solomon's life, it's crucial to understand the heights from which he fell. Solomon was no ordinary king. He was the son of the great King David and Bathsheba, chosen by God to succeed his father on the throne of Israel. From the very beginning, Solomon's reign was marked by divine favor. In 1 Kings 3:5, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, offering him an extraordinary opportunity. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you," God said. Instead of asking for wealth, long life, or the destruction of his enemies, Solomon made a humble and selfless request. In 1 Kings 3:9, Solomon asked for an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. This request revealed his deep concern for justice and wisdom, which would define his legacy. God was greatly pleased with Solomon's request. In 1 Kings 3:10-14, we read that not only did God grant Solomon unparalleled wisdom, but he also promised him riches, honor, and a long life, provided that Solomon remained faithful to God's commands. This moment of divine favor set the stage for Solomon's rise as one of the most powerful and celebrated kings in history. Solomon's wisdom was soon put to the test. One of his most famous judgments came when two women brought a dispute before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same child. In a moment of inspired discernment, Solomon suggested dividing the living child in two, knowing that the true mother would rather give up her claim than see her child harmed. This event, recorded in 1 Kings 3:16-28, showcased Solomon's God-given wisdom, leaving the people of Israel in awe. They marveled at their king, recognizing that God's wisdom was truly with him. Solomon's fame spread far beyond Israel's borders. In 1 Kings 4:29-30 it is written, "God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore." Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. His reputation attracted rulers from distant lands, including the Queen of Sheba. She traveled a great distance to test Solomon with hard questions, and after hearing his answers and witnessing the splendor of his kingdom, she declared in 1 Kings 10:6-7, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me." Yet Solomon's greatest achievement was not his wealth or his wisdom, but the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This temple, described in 1 Kings 6, was an architectural marvel of its time, built with the finest materials, cedar from Lebanon, gold, silver, and bronze. It took 7 years to complete and became the spiritual center of Israel, a place where God's presence dwelt among his people. When the temple was finished, Solomon led the nation in a powerful prayer of dedication. His prayer, recorded in 1 Kings 8:22-53, acknowledged God's greatness and asked him to hear the prayers of his people. Solomon's heartfelt prayer expressed a deep reverence for God, as he said in verse 23, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below." Under Solomon's rule, Israel reached unprecedented heights of wealth, power, and influence. His kingdom was a beacon of prosperity, attracting traders, scholars, and rulers from all corners of the ancient world. In 1 Kings 10:23-24, it is written, "King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth." The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. His annual income in gold alone was a staggering 666 talents, equivalent to over 25 tons of gold each year. According to 1 Kings 10:14, his throne, described in 1 Kings 10:18-20, was a magnificent structure made of ivory and overlaid with pure gold, a symbol of his unparalleled power. But as Solomon's wealth and power grew, so did his pride and reliance on worldly pleasures. Over time, Solomon's heart turned away from God. Despite his early devotion, he allowed himself to be seduced by the allure of foreign alliances and marriages. Solomon took many foreign wives, a direct violation of God's commands. These wives brought their gods and idols into Israel, and Solomon, in his later years, built altars and temples for these false gods. In 1 Kings 11:4, we read the tragic account of Solomon's spiritual downfall. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. This turning away from God marked the beginning of Solomon's decline. The man who had been so richly blessed with wisdom, wealth, and power found himself ensnared by the very things he once sought to avoid. He became entangled in the pursuit of worldly pleasures, neglecting the God who had given him everything. Solomon's downfall serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of pride, temptation, and complacency in our relationship with God. In his later years, Solomon reflected on his life and accomplishments with deep regret. In the book of Ecclesiastes, traditionally attributed to Solomon, we find the words of a man disillusioned with the fleeting nature of worldly success. In Ecclesiastes 1:2, Solomon writes, "Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless." This stark declaration reveals the despair of a man who, despite having everything, realized that true fulfillment cannot be found in wealth, power, or pleasure. The final chapter of Solomon's life is a sobering reminder of the importance of remaining faithful to God throughout our lives. Solomon's story is not just about a king who fell from grace. It is a cautionary tale for all of us who struggle with pride, temptation, and the pull of worldly desires. Despite his unparalleled wisdom, Solomon allowed himself to be led astray, and the consequences were devastating. As we reflect on Solomon's life, we are reminded of the importance of humility, obedience, and unwavering devotion to God. Solomon's wisdom, wealth, and power could not save him from the consequences of turning away from God. His story challenges us to examine our own lives and to seek a relationship with God that is rooted in faith, not in the fleeting pleasures of this world. If this story has resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. These timeless lessons from King Solomon's life can still change ours today. Let us learn from his mistakes and strive to live lives that honor God, seeking his wisdom and guidance in all that we do. King Solomon's reign is a legendary tale of wisdom, wealth, and divine favor, but also one of temptation, disobedience, and ultimate spiritual downfall. His life, as recorded in the Bible, illustrates the duality of human nature, the ability to rise to great heights under God's guidance, and the perilous vulnerability to personal desires that can lead to ruin. The grandeur of Solomon's reign, detailed throughout the book of 1 Kings, is a testament to his immense blessings. But it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing worldly temptation to overshadow devotion to God. The wealth of Solomon's kingdom was unlike anything the world had ever seen. 1 Kings 10:21 captures the extravagance of his rule. All King Solomon's goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. This statement alone illustrates the abundance that marked Solomon's reign. Gold was everywhere, from the utensils used at royal banquets to the very structure of his palaces. Silver, a metal that would be highly prized in any other context, was so common in Solomon's kingdom that it was viewed as almost worthless. This immense wealth did not come without consequence. With riches often comes temptation, and for Solomon, the allure of power and influence led him down a path of moral compromise. His wealth allowed him to forge alliances with surrounding nations. But these alliances were frequently sealed through marriages that directly defied God's commands. Solomon's power grew, but so did the number of his foreign wives. These marriages, described in 1 Kings 11:1-2, were not mere political maneuvers. They signaled a departure from God's law. Solomon loved many foreign women, including Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, and Hittites, nations God had specifically warned Israel against intermarrying with, for they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Despite God's clear warnings, Solomon's heart was increasingly divided. 1 Kings 11:3 tells us that he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. These relationships were more than just personal. They were a direct violation of God's command in Deuteronomy 17:17, which stated, "The king must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray." Unfortunately, this is exactly what happened. The wisdom Solomon had received from God, the very discernment that had made him famous, was overshadowed by his desire to please his wives and secure his political power. As Solomon grew older, his many wives turned his heart away from the Lord. In 1 Kings 11:4 it is written, "As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been." This marked the beginning of Solomon's spiritual decline. He allowed his love for these women to overrule his loyalty to God, leading him to tolerate and eventually participate in idolatrous practices. The Bible records that Solomon built altars to foreign gods, including Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, a fertility deity associated with sensuality and immorality, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites, whose worship included child sacrifice. These actions were in direct defiance of God's command in Deuteronomy 12:2-3, where he instructed the Israelites to destroy all high places dedicated to foreign gods. Instead of destroying them, Solomon built new ones, facilitating pagan worship in the very land God had set apart for himself. The tragic irony of Solomon's downfall is that he, the wisest man on earth, failed to apply that wisdom to his own life. The very gift he had been granted, discernment between good and evil, was now clouded by his moral compromises. His heart, once devoted to God, became divided. The foreign gods worshipped by his wives were not just accepted, they became integral parts of his kingdom's religious landscape. God had warned Israel repeatedly against intermarriage with foreign nations, knowing that it would lead to the worship of false gods. In Deuteronomy 7:3-4, God had explicitly commanded, "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods." Yet, despite these warnings, Solomon allowed himself to be led astray. His disobedience was not just a personal failing, it was a direct violation of the covenant God had made with him. God's anger towards Solomon was inevitable. Despite all the blessings Solomon had received, including 2 personal appearances from God, 1 Kings 9:6-7, Solomon continued in his disobedience. God had warned him clearly, "If you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you, I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them." Yet Solomon, hardened by his sins, persisted in building shrines and worshiping false gods. 1 Kings 11:9-10 records God's response. "The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice." Despite God's warnings, Solomon did not repent or turn back to the Lord. The consequences were severe and would resonate far beyond Solomon's reign. In 1 Kings 11:11, the Lord declared, Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Although God's judgment was harsh, it was tempered with mercy. For the sake of David, Solomon's father, God would not tear the kingdom away during Solomon's lifetime. Instead, the full weight of the consequences would fall on Solomon's son, Rehoboam. This prophecy marked the beginning of the end for the United Kingdom of Israel. What had once been a glorious, God-blessed realm would soon be torn apart by division, conflict, and strife. Solomon's final days were not marked by the joy of his earlier achievements, but by a deep sense of regret and disillusionment. His writings in the book of Ecclesiastes, often attributed to his later years, reflect a man who has come to realize the futility of his pursuits. Meaningless, meaningless, Solomon declares. Everything is meaningless. The man who had it all, wisdom, wealth, power, and divine favor, ended his life reflecting on the emptiness of those accomplishments when separated from God. His story is a powerful reminder that even the wisest and most blessed among us can fall when we turn our hearts away from the Lord. Solomon's life serves as both a warning and a lesson, that no amount of wealth, wisdom, or success can replace the peace that comes from remaining faithful to God's commandments. In Ecclesiastes 1:2, Solomon begins his reflections with a profound lament, saying, "Meaningless, meaningless," says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. These haunting words echo the emptiness and disillusionment Solomon felt as he looked back on his life, which had strayed far from its original purpose. Despite his unparalleled wisdom, he had lost sight of the God who had blessed him with everything. Seated in his magnificent palace, surrounded by the splendors of his wealth, Solomon's mind wandered through the years, recalling both his triumphs and his failures. One of Solomon's most defining moments was the dedication of the temple, a grand and sacred structure built to honor the Lord, as described in 1 Kings 8. Solomon had prayed earnestly during the dedication ceremony for God's presence to fill the temple, and indeed, God's glory descended like a cloud, affirming his pleasure with Solomon's work. It was a moment of divine confirmation, a sign that Solomon's reign had been blessed by God. Yet, as Solomon reflected on his life in his later years, the memory of that day was overshadowed by the realization that his heart had drifted far from those days of devotion. In Ecclesiastes 2:10-11, Solomon candidly reflects on the vanity of his pursuits, saying, "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun." These words are not just the musings of a king who had tasted the heights of success. They are the confessions of a man who had everything, and yet felt profoundly empty. Solomon's wealth was unmatched in the ancient world. He built grand palaces, planted extensive vineyards, amassed vast treasures of gold, silver, and precious stones, and even imported exotic animals to adorn his courts. He had hundreds of servants at his beck and call, as well as musicians to entertain him. He indulged in every pleasure the world had to offer. But now, in his old age, all these accomplishments felt hollow. The once wise king now understood that all his achievements were futile without God. They were, as he put it, like chasing after the wind. In Ecclesiastes 5:10, Solomon reflects on the futility of materialism, saying, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income." This, too, is meaningless. Despite all his riches, Solomon had come to the sobering realization that wealth could never satisfy the deeper longings of the heart. His heart's desires, which had once been in alignment with God, had led him astray in his pursuit of worldly pleasures and power. As a young king, Solomon had enjoyed a close relationship with God. When he first ascended the throne, God appeared to him in a dream, offering to grant him anything he wished. Solomon famously asked for wisdom, and God not only granted him extraordinary wisdom, but also wealth and honor, 1 Kings 3:5-13. Solomon built the temple as a symbol of God's presence among his people, and during those early years his heart was devoted to the Lord. But over time, his many foreign marriages, political alliances, and compromises with idolatry had distanced him from God. He had forsaken his first love, the God who had appeared to him in dreams and granted him the wisdom that once guided his reign. The writings of Solomon reflect a man who had experienced the full spectrum of human life. In Proverbs 3:5-6, Solomon had once counseled others to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Yet in his later years, Solomon had failed to heed his own advice. Instead of trusting in God, he had leaned on his own understanding, straying from the straight path that God had set before him. His pursuit of earthly pleasures, power, and wealth had taken precedence over his relationship with God. In Ecclesiastes 12:13, Solomon offers a final piece of advice that encapsulates the lessons he had learned from a life filled with both triumph and regret. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter: fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. These words, written at the end of his life, reflect the essence of what Solomon had come to understand, that obedience to God is the only true path to fulfillment. His many years of chasing after wealth, wisdom, and pleasure had taught him a hard truth: nothing in this world can replace a heart fully devoted to God. The last days of Solomon's life serve as a sobering reminder of the fleeting nature of earthly pursuits. He had been granted the greatest of gifts, unparalleled wisdom, immense wealth, and divine favor, but had squandered them by turning away from God. As he faced his final moments, he understood that his wisdom, wealth, and power were worthless without a heart that was fully committed to the Lord. In Ecclesiastes 7:29, Solomon expresses a poignant truth, saying, "This only have I found: God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." Solomon, the wisest man of his time, had fallen prey to the very schemes he had once warned others about. His final reflections serve as a warning to all who seek fulfillment in the things of this world rather than in God. Solomon's story is a cautionary tale about the importance of staying true to God. His life began with so much promise, but his later years were marked by spiritual compromise, disillusionment, and regret. The once wise king, who had been blessed by God with unparalleled gifts, allowed himself to be seduced by the allure of wealth, power, and pleasure. In the end, he realized too late that these pursuits were meaningless without a deep and abiding relationship with God. The legacy of King Solomon reminds us that life's greatest treasures are not found in what we build for ourselves, but in the relationship we maintain with our Creator. Solomon's final words offer a timeless truth: fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. It's a lesson that resonates as much today as it did in Solomon's time. No matter how much we achieve, no matter how much wealth or success we accumulate, true fulfillment can only be found in walking with God. In reflecting on Solomon's life, we are reminded that it is not how we start, but how we finish that truly matters. Solomon's last day was not marked by celebration, but by deep reflection on what he had lost. Let us learn from his mistakes and strive to remain faithful to God until the very end. True wisdom, as Solomon discovered too late, comes not from pursuing the things of this world, but from following God with all our heart, mind, and soul.